First of all, a few words about the Komsomol, which I'm sure you all know a lot more than the people I usually talk to, so maybe not too long about that. Then a few words about the 1990s and how there was competition in the arena of not only youth organizations but also the pro-governmental youth organizations. Then moving on to the 2000s and the unity and the establishment of the Belarusian Republican Youth Union, which you might know, the BRSM. Then I'm going to be talking a little bit about the legacy of Komsomol in the BRY youth work and agenda, and then also share some of my very preliminary findings or data which was gathered in Grodno and in Minsk last year when I was there doing some participant observation and interviews, and then a few conclusions. So, what do we know about the Komsomol? We know that the USSR in the Soviet Union, youth was seen both as a great potential and a great threat. A great potential in a way that it was the one that was going to construct communism and socialist society, and that was really the future of the nation. But it was also a great threat because it could be corrupted, and if the young people wouldn't support the communist ideals, then of course everything would end in tears. We know that the Komsomol was a unitary mass membership youth union of the Communist Party state, more a part of the state than any kind of representative organ, as it was also supposed to do. So it was supposed to have this dual role as both a channel from the youth, representing the youth, and sort of instilling communist ideology from the state. And when it comes to the Gorbachev era in the 80s and also before, okay, put it this way, so there were issues of careerism and formalism already before, but it was in the 80s that it was okay, thanks to Glasnost, to talk about it and to write about it. And another important development of the 1980s was the fact that Komsomol started, they got the power to engage in business. So towards sort of from 86, 87 onwards, Komsomol had its own business projects kind of here and there, and it was less about ideology and more about this business stuff. So, and this ultimately led to the union's demise, and it liquidated itself in 1990. Only, it didn't quite liquidate itself, but well, the Central Committee did, but the Republic-level organizations were allowed to reconstruct, and what they did is that they renamed themselves as non-political youth unions. In the Belarusian case, we have the Belarusian Youth Union, which is the official legacy organization, but which doesn't do very much in the early 90s. It has some very nice business thingies, so it's all about that. What we have then, in 95, 96, we get the referendums, we all know, and somehow someone comes up with the idea of having direct action. Actually, it's a gentleman called Yelchevsky who founded this movement that was literally on the streets and fighting for Lukashenko for ideological reasons. And this organization, it was kind of a little bit too violent, so it was renamed as the Belarusian Patriotic Youth Union, or actually it was like a new organization, but it included most of the people from the direct action, and it started to get more and more people. Then there were calls to unite these two youth unions, because the thing is that the Belarusian Youth Union still had far more members than the new Patriotic Youth Union. I don't really know where these members came from. This is something I'm going to have to find out, but it apparently had 70,000 members in 97. So there were these calls to unite the two youth unions, but the Belarusian Youth Union didn't want to go with this because they weren't very fond of being taken over by Janchevsky's Patriotic Youth Union. And the reason why I have this yellow bicycle picture is because, as you probably know, the Patriotic Youth Union was very much supporting Lukashenko, also in elections. Okay, I need to be a little bit quicker. So we know there's been like consolidation of authoritarianism and sort of return to the best practices of the Soviet past. And these five years from 1997 to 2002 are marked by rivalry between BPSM and BSM. A big question was about property, because the BYU had inherited the Komsomol headquarters in the very center of Minsk, and that was their big financial basis. And of course they didn't, because if they got rid of that, then they would lose their financial autonomy. So that's why they didn't want that, but unfortunately they lost the court case, and so these two organizations were merged. And quite interestingly, when I was in Belarus and asking about the 1990s, no one mentioned this episode in the 1990s, so it's quite interesting that the sort of legacy of the Belarusian Youth Union has been completely suppressed. Okay, now talking about the Belarusian Republican Youth Union, I'm sure most of you know about this organization and might have some strong emotions, so if you want to share any of that with me later on, I'll be very happy. As a legacy organization, it's very open about the status, and it's sort of officially a source of pride and inspiration. The ideology behind the Youth Union is that of the Belarusian state, so it's about statist patriotism. As an organization, it fully relies on state support. In fact, it has become this Komsomol-style executor of youth policy more than anything else. And this also means that it has many of the Komsomol-era structures, idea about mass membership, and the fact that the higher-level activists receive salaries. Although I must say that they're not as old as the Komsomol leaders were back in the day. But it's this very strict hierarchy going from primary cells in every university, in every school, in every factory, in every whatever, and then sort of regions and districts and cities, and then the central committee. However, something I'm going to be talking about, if I have time, is this stigma of membership, because it was quite soon that I realized that being a BYU activist is not really a cool thing, at least not in Minsk. So actually, when I went to Belarus, I was doing interviews with all kinds of organizations, but soon, I think after a week or so, I became kind of obsessed with the Republican Youth Union, just because they're so odd mix of all the new elements, and also this idea that you're like so proud that you're the Komsomol legacy organization, but at the same time it's somehow really embarrassing that you're, Lukashenko's Lukamol. You probably know that as well, right? So here are just some thoughts of those four weeks in Belarus. At first I had major issues with rapport, so people didn't really want to talk to me, obviously coming from Finland and coming there and asking all sorts of weird questions. But soon I realized that people are also able to say what they think. And I think Komsomol legacy was one of these big themes that I discussed with people, and the fact that how it's both great and it's also really, really bad. So these lower level activists were all the time talking about the bad reputation and the issues with a bad image, and that this should be tackled, and that people don't like the union because they think it does nothing and it's just Komsomol, whereas in fact it does all of these great things and gives you all these great opportunities. I was also asking people about their personal motivation for activism, and I have 2 minutes. that's fine. So I found that it was very sort of mundane reasons, like a friend of mine was attending these events, so I went along. So it's more about like hanging out with people, maybe getting cheaper tickets to the movies, but there's definitely no like great strong emotions that you want to be a patriot and you want to instill these ideas to your fellow students, for example. But there is definitely a tension between this idea that you're supposed to be executing youth policy and you also want to represent. And I think that's also visible in these activists from different levels. So higher level officials were talking more about how it's important that you educate the youth so that they don't start taking drugs or go out to demonstrate or do all kind of things that you don't want them to do. Whereas lower level activists were more about, you know, we can do great stuff, but we can't because the higher level organization is telling us to do something else. Like, for example, collect signatures. Okay, since I only have 1 minute, I will skip this amazing video. Maybe we can watch it in the end if we don't have time, or maybe you can go on YouTube to this union's website. There's a lot of great material out there. So the sort of big questions for me, now that this is work in progress, so I'm only going to do my proper data collection later this year, is first of all about structure and agency. So was the Republican Youth Union sort of reinvigorated because Lukashenko wanted it? Was it because Janchelski wanted it? Or where does this structure and agency come to play? If you have ideas, come and let me know. Also, this today's organizational agenda is a hybrid between old and new elements, and I find it very, very, very interesting. And I think that's all I have time for today. And if you have questions and comments, I'll be very happy to take them later on. Thank you.